Good morning, church. Well, let me begin with sharing with you something about next week. So a week from today, I'm starting a new series called Home Improvement. Not the TV show from the 90s, although who watched that show? Anybody Home Improvement fans? It's a great show. I did borrow the title from that show. But home life is pretty important. You spend a lot of your years at home, and when your home life is off, well, that affects the entire quality of the rest of your life. And so this particular series is really geared towards how do you make the home life better? Whether you're working on your marriage or you're a parent trying to figure out what to do with whatever stage that you're in, or maybe you have a roommate, home life is super important. And so next week I really want you to come back, super practical series. In 2010, I went on a mission trip, and I have a lot of good memories. Two really stand out to me. One is we had the teenagers were playing this game. I'm actually not sure who came up with the game, but the game went something like this. A teenager would be it, and no one would know that teenager was it, and they would give this symbol to somebody else covertly. It's just the letter F in sign language. When the person would see that symbol, their job was to pretend to die very dramatically wherever they were. Very strange game. If you're wondering why there might be some very messed up people in their 20s, it's because they were in my youth group and they played this game. Very strange game. Not sure who invented it. Very odd. So we played this throughout the week, and people kept forgetting we were playing the game, both adult sponsors and teenagers, so the teens kept having to say, remember, we're playing this game. Well, one particular day, someone did the symbol, they were it, and they did it towards my wife, Mary. And so my wife, Mary, who's not necessarily a very outspoken person, she turned on the charm, and she died very dramatically. I mean, it was a lot of moaning, a lot of groaning, just very dramatic, and she just collapsed to the ground. Well, this was in a busy lunchroom, and at that time, Mary was 8 months pregnant. So, you can place yourself in this situation. What would you do if an 8 months pregnant woman just suddenly fell over screaming in pain? Well, I'll tell you what Dee Dobson did. So Dee Dobson, one of our longtime members, was there, and she sees Mary go down, and she runs across the room, and she gets right in her face, and she's like, "It's going to be okay. Just keep breathing. Call 911. This lady's having a baby." To which Mary had to look at Dee and say, "Dee, remember, it's just a game. It's just a game." So sometimes you forget things, and the best thing to do when you forget something is to remember. So today is going to be a pretty different service as far as the preaching time. And by the way, if this is your first Sunday here, what you're about to experience the next few minutes is not at all the way I normally preach. But we're going to do some remembering today about what our church family has done the last 9 months. We have focused on a theme called the Refuge, in which we have tried to I've tried to give a series of messages and tried to give you very tangible practices to put you in the presence of the Lord and to really cultivate your life with Christ. And so what we want to do today is remember what we have done the last 9 months. I also remember a second thing that happened on this trip from years ago. I'll never forget Jasmine. She was 15 years old. She had grown up in a very broken home, absent mother, abusive father. She was not like all the teens on the mission trip who grew up in homes with a lot of warmth, and they had parents that would visit, or parents that went to all their sporting games. She did not grow up in that kind of a home environment. She's 15 years old, and we found out she had never had a birthday party. And so the teenagers on the trip decided to do something about it. So one particular evening, we were supposed to do something else, and the teenagers said, "Hey, can we not do this certain activity? We want to throw a party for Jasmine." And so they got balloons, they got decorations, they ordered pizza, and they sang happy birthday to Jasmine, and she, for the first time in her life, heard those words at 15 years old. I'll always remember that because there are certain moments in life where you have to celebrate. You have to celebrate. And what happens is we get so busy that we forget to do that. What happens is you get through one season of life or you get through one accomplishment and you immediately start thinking about what's next, and you forget to pause and just celebrate what is. And so that's what today is going to be about. We're going to do two things. We're going to remember, and we are going to celebrate. In fact, I'll give you two scriptures from the Bible that talk about these two things. One is in 2 Peter. Peter addresses this idea of remembering when he says, I will always remind you of these things even though you already know them. So there is a place in our life for reminding ourselves of things we already know. Or you might remember the story of the prodigal son. Son runs away. When he comes back, the father has this great line. It's just 4 words. He says, we had to celebrate. Like we had to. Like we're not ready to move on. We're not going to renegotiate the new work contract with my son. Like we have to pause. We have to celebrate. And so we're going to do those two things this morning in some pretty different and unique ways. In fact, I'll go ahead and ask this at this time. I have a group of volunteers that's going to help me out in just a minute, hand out commemorative bracelets for this past year. If you're one of those volunteers, go ahead and stand up where you are and make your way either down front where Andy is or towards one of the back doors, and you'll get some instructions on what to do. So the volunteers, big thank you. That's some of them are teenagers from our lead team. Some of them are section greeters from each section. And then we also have some people with Celebrate Recovery that are going to be helping us out, pass out bracelets. In fact, let me pause here and say a word about Celebrate Recovery. So every Friday, our Celebrate Recovery ministry meets. And one of my favorite parts about Celebrate Recovery is the way that they celebrate. So each week when people come in at 7 o'clock, they have a time to recognize the milestones that people have made in their journey. So, someone might come in and they're 3 months in their journey of forgiveness. Well, people stand up and applaud that, and they receive a chip for that. And so I've always loved Celebrate Recovery. And so we're going to attempt to do something somewhat similar to that as far as recognizing achievement here in this worship service. So big thanks to all the volunteers and big thanks to Celebrate Recovery. So here's how this will work. I'm going to review. We had 4 big sections of the year. Sabbath, simplicity, technology, and then spiritual disciplines. And so I'm going to review what we learned in like 2 to 3 minutes per section. So this is very different than the way I normally preach. I'm going to give you a ton of content, stuff we've already reviewed this year. So after we review, then I'm going to ask you to stand up if you completed one of our many challenges that we had this year. So here we go. Last fall, here's where we started. I launched this year with a series called Breaking Busy. And the whole idea behind this series was that we are so busy. It's become this Olympic sport. We brag about it. We're proud of it, but it's not necessarily healthy. In fact, I think that if Jesus were to come into our culture and analyze how busy we are, I actually think he would ask us the identical question that he asked the lame man who had been a lame man for 38 years. And do you remember the question that he asked that guy? He said, do you want to get well? I think if Jesus were to come into our culture, our type A driven, go busy culture, he would say, guys, do you even want to get better? And so we talked about this last fall, and the big 2 tools that I presented as ways to combat busyness are, number 1, the practice of Sabbath, and number 2, the power of no. So here's what we learned about Sabbath. Here's a good theme verse for Sabbath, Mark 2:27. The Sabbath was made for man. Like God designed it to keep us sane. One of the things that we learned about Sabbath is this: the Sabbath is designed to be restorative, not restrictive. All 6 Sabbath stories in the Gospels follow the same arc, which is they end with restoration. They end with healing. And so Jesus was trying to communicate this message that not that Sabbath is not important, but that Sabbath in its original form was meant to restore humanity to who we were really supposed to be. We also learned that Sabbath is a rehearsal of heaven. This is what we learn in Hebrews. That heaven is given the title Sabbath in Hebrews chapter 4. And so Sabbath practiced on earth is actually a rehearsal of the eternity to come. One more thing we learned about Sabbath is pretty simple. Sabbath is God's declaration to the world that he is not a workaholic. Some of you are busier than Jesus, and you should stop that. Here's one thing we learned about the power of no. This comes from a book by Lisa Turkhurst. This is my favorite line from her book. She says, your best yes comes from your wisest no. So we all get asked to do 1,000 things. And what happens is if you say yes to everything, well, you don't really do anything well. And so you need some really healthy no's, some wise no's in your life in order to give some really good yeses. So that's what we learned last fall. So here's what I would like to do. If you practiced a Sabbath day, or if you had a moment this last 9 months where you're just really proud of something that you said no to and that freed up time to do something else, I would like you to stand right now, and we'd like to give you a bracelet, and we'd like to congratulate you. So stand up if you practiced the Sabbath or had a great no. And let's give these people a round of applause. And volunteers that are passing these around, you're welcome to high five people, give them a fist bump. You know, I want to celebrate. That was a really, really good high five there. So one thing I want to do this morning is I want to hear some stories about people who have done some of these challenges. And so the first person I want you to hear from is Reagan Crawford, and she had a pretty great no a few months ago. So Reagan, tell us about this really big no that you had.
Okay, so last September I had a job that I really liked, and I had just got the job at the beginning of September. And I play basketball, so at the beginning of October, I started getting super, super busy. So they adjusted my schedule, and the days that I was working, I just felt like I had no time. I worked Wednesday nights, and then I worked all day Sunday, so I would leave church kind of like the middle of Bible class, and then I wouldn't get to go to youth group most Wednesdays. And so I felt like it was kind of just, I started feeling kind of disconnected, really stressed, and I really liked the people I worked with. I felt like they needed me. They probably didn't, but that's just how I am. And so I had a really hard time just deciding to say, I don't need to be doing this anymore. And then we talked about this that Sunday, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I talked about it with my D group, and I was like, if I don't do this by next week, you guys get on me. And so the next week, they were like, it's time, Reagan. So I went into work that day, and I was like, explained it to them, and they were so nice about it. And I feel like I've been blessed since then with the amount of time I had and what I was able to do with the time that I wasn't working, and I feel less stressed and more available for people. So, yeah.
That's so cool. Let's give Reagan a round of applause. That's fantastic. So just to summarize what Reagan said, she was doing family stuff, church stuff, basketball stuff, and she had a job, and it was too much. And so she had to have a really, really big no. And so she just decided to quit her job, which I think we should all do, right, Reagan? So it's a really, really good idea. I love that story because that was hard, but you did it and your life got better because of it. After we talked about Sabbath and the power of no, we moved on to a different series called Simplicity. And the big idea of this series was that less is actually more. And so we learned a whole lot in this series. Matthew 6 was our theme verse for this series. Let's say this one all together. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. So that was the big idea for this series. Here's a few things that we learned, if you remember when you were here. One thing we learned is that possessions are future garbage, but people are future heirs. And so we actually found this study that did some research on how long it takes for clothing to go from the store to your closet and to the landfill. And it's not that long. It's about 5 years that it goes from the rack on the clothing store, then it goes to your closet. You wear it for about 2 to 3. You give it away to charity, and then eventually it ends up in a landfill. So all possessions are future garbage, but people, they're future heirs. They will last for eternity with the Lord Jesus. And so I loved this quote. My favorite quote from the whole series is from a guy named Josh Fields, and he said this: love people, use things because the opposite doesn't work. Love people, use things because the opposite never works. It's a great thought from Josh. Here's something else we learned about simplicity. We learned that trendy simplicity is therapeutic, but missional or biblical simplicity is missional. And so there's a difference there. We don't simplify our lives just so that we can feel better about ourselves. we really simplify our lives so that we can free up time, money, space, and energy for the kingdom of God. So the end game is missional. David and Renee Knox, they moved to Hawaii. I want to remind you of this really neat story. They sold 95% of their possessions before they left. And so when they got to Hawaii, they had virtually nothing. And he sent me an email in the middle of this series, and I loved what he said. You can put the next slide up there. He said, shortly after we arrived, a major hurricane was heading directly towards us. And as all of the islands were preparing for disaster, we realized that we literally had very little to lose. Have you ever thought about that? If you don't have as much stuff, you're not afraid about losing it. We had never had this feeling before, and what a good feeling that it was. You see, simplicity has so many benefits. And so here we had a lot of challenges for this part of the year. Put this challenge card up here. We asked you if you wanted to wear the same outfit to church 3 weeks in a row. Who did that? Just raise your hand if you did that. And who got angry with me for making you do that? I see how it is. Number 3 on the list, a lot of you took the challenge on number 3 and gave away 250 possessions per family member. We had a lot of giving projects, and then some of you at the very end, you actually changed your diet for a while to practice simplicity with what you ate. So same thing, if you completed any of these challenges on the screen, I'd like you to stand up where you are, please. And let's give these people a round of applause. I will also say this as you're getting your bracelets. I know some of you could get a lot of bracelets today, but once you get one bracelet, go ahead and let other people have the bracelets. However, if you already have a bracelet and you complete a challenge, I still want you to stand up so we can recognize you. But let's try as best we can to go one bracelet per person. While you're getting your bracelets, I'm going to tell you another story. So I really wanted this guy to be here because I wanted you to hear it firsthand. He could not be here, so I'm going to read it to you. David Castle, I think he gave away more items than anybody else in our congregation. So when I was in the middle of this series, he sent me this email and he was like, Phil, I got to make a confession. Like, I just have to share with somebody how much stuff I have in my garage and attic, and I need you to motivate me to give it away. So I emailed him back and I was like, yeah, just do it. Give it away. So he kept track of all of it. Here's what he gave away. And he gave me permission to share this with you. 50 extension cords. I got to get 2 of those. I was happy about that. 6 lawnmowers. 75 coffee mugs. 6 bench vices. 4 sledgehammers. 2 generators. 7 laptops. And then the rest of these he didn't put a number on, but a certain number of ladders, ropes, pillows, chains, knives, coins, baseball caps, t-shirts, CDs, nail clippers. Don't know why you give away that. Bibles. Don't know why you give away that either. Maybe he has a lot of Bibles. Light bulbs, shovels, hose, rakes, padlocks, card tables, folding chairs, flashlights, scissors, Christmas lights, and a partridge and a pear tree. Isn't that impressive? But he also told me the one collection that he kept, I need to ask him about this, it was his collection of chainsaws. So I don't know why he kept that. So if anybody has beat David Castle on how many items you gave away, I want you to come find me after service because that would be very impressive. So after we did the Simplicity Drive, then that took us to the start of 2019, and we had a series which some people loved and some people hated. And it was called Break Up With Your Phone. And this is where we looked right at the heart of our relationship to technology. So here was our theme verse, 1 Corinthians 6. Let's read this together. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. So the whole point about technology is not that technology is bad, it's that many of us have allowed technology in our phones and our TVs and our computers and our tablets to master us. We no longer have authority over our devices. So here's some of the things that we learned. Number 1, your relationship with your device will dramatically shape your relationship with Christ. If you are addicted to your phone, your anxiety goes up, your empathy goes down. You are more cruel behind a screen than you are in person. We also learned this. Your phone was actually designed to addict. The very software built into the phone is designed to keep us addicted. Here's a great quote from a former Google executive. He said, "Every app is ultimately designed to make money for its creators. The longer you stare at the screen, the more money they make." So it's actually designed to addict. And so what we did in this series is we actually put the challenge card up there. We had a lot of challenges for the phone part of the year. Part of it was deleting social media apps. Part of it, if you remember, in January, we had Bring Your Paper Bible to Church month. And then later on in this challenge, it all led up to a let's go without our phones for 24 hours, which quite a few of you did. And then it was really fun because quite a few of us got together at the end of that phone fast for kind of an old school church game night that we called FaceTime. So it was a really fun time of the year. So if you completed any of these challenges when it comes to you and your relationship with your phone, I'd like you to stand up. Anybody? All right, let's give them a round of applause. All right, and while the bracelets are being passed around and the high fives are being given out, I want you to hear from Kendon Murrell. So Kendon gave up. Did you give up your phone for 24 hours?
Yeah.
So he did no phone for 24 hours. And then, tell us about that experience, what you liked.
All right. So, our family, we gave up our phones for the 24 hours and attended the community game night, FaceTime. And, it was so refreshing to connect with everyone without the distraction of our phones.
Yeah.
And so, we agreed we wanted to make that a habit in our family to do that, to use our phones less at home and to be more engaged and present for the people that we're with. And so for the past couple of months, I guess, when I come home from work, as I walk in the door, I set my phone on the counter, and I don't look at it pretty much the whole rest of the evening.
Really?
And and that's, it's caused a little anxiety for family members during tornadoes and flooding, but,
Yes.
but, I'm enjoying being more fully present with my wife and my daughter. We play together, we chat, we cook, and sit down and eat dinner together. And it's just, it's refreshing. It's freeing not to have that urge to check your phone every time a message pops up.
So let me get this straight. You heard these messages, and you not only did the phone fast one time, but you actually applied the principles to your life on an ongoing basis?
On ongoing basis.
Wow, you guys should try that. You guys should try that. It's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kendon. So, give him a round of applause. And then the final initiative that we took on this year was later this spring, we started talking about spiritual disciplines, and I did a few messages on spiritual disciplines, but then we also took a group of about 100 away for a weekend to do an intensive training about spiritual disciplines. And here's some of the things that we learned from this initiative. So theme verse, Luke 6:40, let's read it together. Everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. So the big idea behind spiritual disciplines is it's your relationship with the Lord and your progress in your journey of faith has very little to do with how much you try, and it has everything to do with how much you train. So when you put the time in with spiritual disciplines, what happens is that over time, you naturally start to think more and act more like Jesus, because a disciple, when he's fully trained, will look like their teacher. Here's a few of the kind of key takeaways from those series. One, this was a quote from a guy that lived 2,700 years ago, but this is so accurate. We do not rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. I love this quote. You can have the greatest goals in the world, but that's not going to matter if you don't have the training or the systems in your life to support those expectations and goals. Another thing we learned is that spiritual disciplines are the key to spiritual growth. If you want to grow, you got to put in the work. We also learned that it's easier for Satan to crush passion than it is discipline. Anybody can be passionate about anything, and it's pretty easy to deflate passionate people. But it's very hard to discourage disciplined people. And that's why spiritual disciplines are so important for the spiritual life. And then one more great quote from Eugene Peterson, which has been kind of an anchor phrase for me for quite a while. He encourages us to stay last to the mast of the Word. And he uses a story from Greek mythology to make that point. But just to remind you. So we did a lot with spiritual disciplines, and we did take 100 people away. And before we do that, if you A, went on the spiritual disciplines retreat, or B, if you have just adopted a spiritual discipline in your life sometime in the last 9 months, I'd like you to go ahead and stand up so we can recognize you. Anybody? Go ahead and stand up. Stand up. All right, let's give these people a round of applause. Oh, Joe. So we love giving things away, but we don't like to pray. That's what I'm just kidding. No, I want you to hear so Jill Nichols went on the spiritual disciplines retreat, and I want you to hear a little bit from her reflecting on that experience.
So there were so many good things about the retreat. It was nice to get to hear from different people, get different tips on meditations and different ways you can put those disciplines into practice in your daily life. And a couple of those I definitely have gotten to use, and even gotten to use with my work with some of my clients. But I think the most beneficial thing for me is just the fact that we set aside 2 days just to be available to God. And so you had 2 days that you were sort of free from distraction. We were so much in the Word, so much just in His presence. And there was given a really nice amount of free time where you could just be spending time with God and hearing directly from Him through His Word, through your thoughts. And that's such a powerful mountaintop thing that we don't set time for a lot of times in our adult life. And so I was just very thankful for that.
Yeah, and you're so right. You have to set the time aside, but when you do it, it's so refreshing and it's so rewarding. Let's give a round of applause for Jill. So big thanks to all of you that took a lot of steps this year with your walk with the Lord. What I'd like to do is just one last time, if you completed any of these challenges, this is a day of celebration. We'd like to celebrate your achievement one last time. So all of you who have a bracelet or who completed a challenge, stand up one more time and let's celebrate together. So you can remain standing. What I'd like you to do now is I want you to take 2 minutes, and I want you to turn to your neighbor and answer this one question to reinforce some of these ideas. Is there a question? My biggest takeaway from this past year has been. Now, if you haven't been with us, then you just say, one thing I've learned this past year was. Take 2 minutes, turn to your neighbor, answer the question, and then I'll wrap up. Let me give one more big thank you for our volunteers and for CR and for all that you do. So if you have been sitting there thinking, I would have loved to do one of those challenges, just let me know. You can find my email on the website. I'm happy to email you any of the challenges that we've tried this year. They were really, really beneficial for our church family. When I started the whole year series theme about 8 or 9 months ago, I started with this verse, Matthew 11:28, so I'd like to read it again. This is the verse that's on those bracelets as well. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." A yoke was a mechanical device used in the ancient world to do two things. Number one, the yoke allowed animals to share the load together. And number two, the yoke was a training mechanism so that one animal could learn how to plow from another animal. So it was a sharing device and a teaching device. And so Jesus here in this paragraph uses the yoke as his metaphor for what it means to follow him. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Now, why would Jesus use the metaphor yoke? Well, I think he's getting at both of these connotations of the word. On the one hand, if you choose to follow Jesus with the rhythm of your life, you're going to find that two things happen. One, you're going to find that a new skill is learned. When you choose to live your life with the rhythms that Jesus lived his life by, what you'll find is that you will become a peaceful, graceful, purposeful person in the middle of a stressful, brutal world. A new skill will be learned. Second thing that'll happen if you yoke yourself together with Jesus is that a burden will be shared. When you walk with Jesus, it's not that you don't have burdens, they're just lighter. Because when you walk with Jesus, you're not carrying them all by yourself. He wants you to come to him because life in Christ is actually better. Come to Christ, find your refuge. If you need to come to Christ today, we're about to sing a song and you're going to have the opportunity to do that. If you've never given your life to Christ in the waters of baptism, I'd like you to come forward and tell me about that. If you need the prayers of this church, we'd love to pray for you. Let's stand and let's sing.